Welcome to the INRIS Files. Thoughts on life, culture, the human condition from a very specific Generation X point of view. This has been a fascinating week for me because a couple of topics seem to keep popping up repeatedly, and it's on my mind. It's just something that's been on my mind because it keeps coming up. And the fact of the matter is, I can't advise people on how to live. I can't necessarily tell you what is the right answer to every situation, but I can tell you things that I've experienced and hope that it is somehow relevant to yours. Uh, right now, Generation X is in its late 40s, 50s, and as a result, we've got a little more experience than we had 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But that means there are a lot of situations that I've seen play out in the past, and one of those has to do with imposter syndrome. I know that there are times when you just feel absolutely certain about something, and you go ahead and you just you've got it, and you're set and you're ready to go. And then there are other times when you go into a situation where you think you're ready, but you're not sure. And then you start to doubt yourself and you second guess yourself. And you start to experience this thing that we call imposter syndrome, where you feel like an imposter, even though you probably know that you should be where you are. And this is something that I have noticed I experience more and more as time goes on. And the pardon me, it seems like the more I know, the more I realize I don't know. And I am often subject to focusing on all of the things I don't know rather than concentrating on the things that I do. I just got off a call just a little bit earlier today with a friend who was talking about how when you are about to make a presentation, you've already prepared for it, and just in doing that, you already are a step ahead of the people you are making the presentation to. If it is on a topic that you have studied, you've taken classes in or courses in, if it's something you've read books about or watched educational materials about, you already have all of that information in your reservoir, and your audience probably does not. And if you were to try to think about all of the time and the money that you have spent on reading those books, taking those courses, thinking about it, researching it, practicing it, experiencing it, that time, that money, that has a value. And when you are offering that to somebody else, you are offering them value. You may not be the absolute pinnacle of information in that particular field, but that doesn't diminish your own value. In the synthesizer Skool community, there's a topic that comes up from time to time where, as you are proceeding down the roadmap of whatever your field happens to be, you only need to be a step or two ahead of somebody to be able to be of value to them, to be able to pull them forward. You can even offer value to the people who are further ahead if you have some experience that they don't already have. This can be something that you can keep in mind in your own mental model to try to alleviate this idea of imposter syndrome. There's something else that you can try too, and that is just leaping and trusting that the net will appear. And so the story I want to tell you today is uh, Looking back on it, it's a very surreal experience, but it was something that at the time when you're living it, you're fixated on how is this going to play out? I had left high tech. I'd been working in high tech and I had left the field because I was burning out. And I decided I wanted to do work that had meaning, that had value to society. And what more could I do than teach young people? Because of the degrees that I had accumulated over time, I easily qualified for a teaching certificate in Massachusetts, which is where I lived at the time. So I got my teaching certificate, and then I pursued a teaching job. And this is absolutely hilarious, where my teaching certificate, because of the courses I had taken, allowed me or certified that I can teach social studies or English at the high school level. Well, it turns out a lot of people have teaching certificates for teaching social studies and English at the high school level. But there were some other jobs that I noticed weren't getting filled, and those included this one job that I noticed that was for a math teacher in the 8th grade. So, because I did have a background in high tech, and that did stem from having taken a lot of math classes in addition to all of the other classes I had taken, even though I wasn't certified, I applied for the job and I got the interview. And then in the interview, I guess part of it is because the people who were interviewing me didn't know as much math as I did. I was I was a step ahead of them, and that was enough to convince them that I was the right person for this job, because they had not yet seen anybody come through who was capable of actually teaching the concepts that the math class required. The thing is, when you're teaching, you have a curriculum that's already laid out for you. You can essentially, as long as you are reading one day ahead of your class, you can present them the material that you have read, and the class doesn't necessarily have to know that you're only one step ahead of them. I was a little bit more than a step. I had taken a bunch of courses when I was in college, and it was a fascinating experience. And in fact, this is an experience that I would love to go into at some point, about the education system in the United States at the time that I was teaching, because everybody talks about the failing education system. Even when scores are on the rise, everybody's preoccupied with how terrible everything is. Well, uh, probably a topic for another day, but one of the things that I did discover is everybody contributes to the success and everybody contributes to the problems associated with public education. The teachers, the parents, the administration, law enforcement, politicians, everybody combined. For all that works and for all that doesn't work, everybody contributes to that system. After I had completed that year, because I was not, I was essentially hired as what's called a permanent substitute or a permanent replacement. I was filling the role that had been vacated by the math teacher who had been teaching up until that point in the school year. In fact, they had already gone through two math teachers when I came in. And the idea was I would finish out the year and then they would evaluate and decide whether or not to offer me a full time job. So I taught, finished out the year. The kids did absolutely as well as could be expected for kids who have gone through 3 math teachers during the course of their year, or at least experienced 3 math teachers. Um, and the administration was very happy with my work, and then they offered me a job. Now, up until this point, I was making the pay that substitute teachers make, even though I was a permanent substitute, which essentially meant that it was close to nothing. Remember, this is a story about knowing your worth and imposter syndrome. So now that they had established they did want to hire me on full time, because in the United States, teaching in general is a unionized role, which means you have your labor contracts are negotiated by a labor union with the school district. They have a chart of how much each position pays. And they essentially, with my master's degree and everything else that I had, they essentially arrived at a dollar figure that was less than half what I had been making when I was in high tech. And this is a funny way to put it, but I did the math and realized I could not afford to continue living in the apartment that I was in without taking on a roommate and make the car payments when it came time to replace the beater car that I had. I had a car that was older than I was. I couldn't do that on the salary that they were offering. I would have to take on a roommate, and that was not something that was where I wanted to go at this particular point in my life. And so I very reluctantly turned down the position. The thing is, I turned it down without already having some other job. But I knew that if I accepted the position and then found another job and then told them that I was leaving, I was going to essentially be leaving the school district high and dry. Yet again, they were going to have to search for another math teacher during the school year. And that wasn't something that I wanted to be responsible for. So I told them that I wasn't going to be able to take the job. And then I started calling everybody I knew in high tech saying, hey, do you know of any openings for somebody with my skill set? Something I have discovered over the years is that if you want to work in a conventional work setting, it is a lot easier to get a position if you know somebody than it is to get it through ads in the job postings on the job boards. I spoke with a friend of mine who said, well, as it so happens, this one employer that we both used to work for, I know that they need somebody in who has the skills that you had gained in a position that you had after you had left this company. So maybe they would want to bring you back. So I went and I interviewed with them. Now, this is a fascinating situation because I had had this conversation no more than a couple of days after I had turned down the job with the school district. So now here I am. I'm back in the high tech environment, and I was interviewing at a company where I had worked before. And believe me, I had good reason for leaving that company before, but I was working at a much lower level in the organization there. And this was an opportunity to work at a much higher level. I would actually be answering to the president of the company. So I went on the interview. The interview went very well. And then they called me back in and they made me an offer. This is something I have only seen in movies up until this point in my life. I'm sitting in this conference room at this nice heavy duty table. And then we have the vice president of operations who was essentially making me the offer. The president was out on this particular day. So even though I was going to be working for the president, it was the vice president who was making me the offer. He wrote a dollar figure on a piece of paper. And then he put the piece of paper face down on the desk and he pushed it slowly across the desk to me. I've seen this before in movies. I never knew that this was something that actually happened. I guess in hindsight, this is one of those things where once you're talking about a dollar value that gets a certain height, uh, they don't like to talk about money. And since I was working with a VP instead of with somebody who was further down, uh, he didn't want to talk about money, but he wrote it on a piece of paper and he slid it slowly across. Now, because I had spoken with this friend of mine, he already knew what that position should offer. He already knew, in fact, what somebody else who had had that position was getting paid. And so when I looked at the offer was $10,000 a year less than what I had been told this position paid. And I thought long and hard about this while I'm sitting at the table because a number of thoughts flashed through my head simultaneously. Among them being, I'm unemployed now. I can't go back to teaching, and I couldn't afford to go back to teaching anyway. Yes, it's only been a couple of days, but I don't know how long it is going to be before I get my next interview or my next job offer. Here is a bona fide offer. And the dollar value that they were offering me actually was equivalent to what I had been making before I left high tech. So it's not that it was a terrible offer. Do I take the risk and ask for what I knew the position could pay? And I decided to behave as if I was worth what the position paid. So I said, I appreciate this offer, but I was thinking of a different number. And the VP was thinking about it and he said, well, what did you have in mind? And then he pulled a pen out of his pocket and he slid the pen across the desk to me because I guess they don't want to actually talk about money. So I crossed out the number they had written and I wrote a number that was $10,000 a year more. And then I turned the piece of paper over and I slid it right back to him exactly the way he had slid it to me. And he picked up the piece of paper and he looked at it and he considered. And then he said, well, that it is a little bit more than I was expecting, but I will give this some thought and we will call you. And I thanked him. I thanked him for the offer. I thanked him for the time. And then that was the end of our conversation. I swear, I had only seen this in movies up until this point. I never knew that was a thing. So I got back home. I was only home about half an hour before I got a call saying, we accept your counter proposal. And if you agree, we will go ahead and work up the paperwork and send you printed copy of the offer. And I said I agreed. And that's another thing too, is that they want you to agree to the offer before they actually formally give you the offer. And this is something that I have always experienced in corporate America. And I don't know why that is. Every time I've run a small company, that's not something I've ever done. But anyway, so I agreed that I would accept the offer. Then they made the offer. They sent it over to me and we were off to the races. After I accepted the offer, I got a call from the school district and I was talking with the head of the math department and she said, I understand that money was the reason that you weren't able to accept the offer. And so I spoke with the union head and we decided that we would accept the years you have worked in high tech as if they were years that you had worked in the school district. And given that it would raise the salary that we had offered you by $4,000 a year. And I have to say, I was really touched because I knew that that was a lot of work she had to go through in order to get this concession from the union in order to be able to make this offer to me. I had also already accepted an offer that was twice what was being offered to me. I mean, even though they were offering me $4,000 more than they had offered me, I had already accepted a job that was $10,000 more what I had been making before. So again, I was still in the twice as much as a teacher gets paid salary range. So I very reluctantly had to turn that job down. I tell this story because it came to mind while I was talking with some people earlier this week about how a lot of people I know right now are working for less than they are worth because they are afraid to ask for more. And in fact, while having these conversations, there have been participants in the conversations who have pointed out so-and-so went out on a limb and asked for a 50% higher rate than what they had been asking, knowing that the people could just go away. And instead, they all agreed to that dollar value, actually making them wonder if instead of asking for 50% more, maybe they should have asked for twice what their asking rate had been, which, by the way, the answer is probably yes. We don't know what other people value our experience at until we ask. And that is the only way to find out, is to ask for what that position is probably worth. So there's the two aspects of valuing yourself. And the one is asking, and the other is keeping in mind there's a reason that you are making the offer that you are, whether you are offering to teach math to 8th graders or whether you are offering to build something for a high-tech company. Whatever it is that you are offering it because you have some experience, you have some education in that particular field, or even if you don't have that education and experience, you have the gumption to go out and find out what you have to do in order to actually do it. And I do know people who have succeeded that way as well. So I offer this as a little bit of an antidote to imposter syndrome. And I offer it as actually a humorous story about, yeah, people do actually write down numbers and slide them across a big table when they're making you an offer. I guess if they're at a high enough rank. And I just offer it as a little bit of personal experience that I have accrued along the way. It's not like this is ever since then I've never had imposter syndrome. It's not like ever since then I have never accepted a position at a dollar value that I thought maybe it should pay more. It's always a question of how comfortable you are with saying no and risking losing a potential situation. But sometimes when you leap, the net will appear. And that's something that I highly encourage you to consider. That's what I have for today. And I thank you very much for tuning in to the INRIS Files. I hope the story was mildly entertaining at the very least. And this is me expressing my imposter syndrome. But you've stuck it out this long, and I really do appreciate it. And if you have any questions or concerns or comments, put them in the comment section below, and I will try to address them in a future video. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time. Take care.